Before we dismiss to Kids Church, Arcadia, I see you trying to go. Before we dismiss to Kids Church, I have a couple of announcements. The first one is a huge thank you from the youth group, from me, from all of the kids, to all of you. Last weekend, our fundraiser was amazing. We had 15 students that signed up to participate in the scholarship fund for camp. And we already have 18 committed to go or signed up, which is awesome. But 15 of them signed up for that. All 15 have already received a scholarship. So give yourselves a hand for that. That's awesome. And on top of that, the fundraiser pushed $5,000 total, counting everything all in. And so we are eternally grateful for the generosity of this church. You guys have always been generous, and you never cease to amaze. So I am grateful from the bottom of my heart. The teens will be excited. I got the idea about camp from another youth group, another youth minister from Texas, and they said they sent their kids to camp for free. And I know every year we had a large number of students that needed a scholarship. And so instead of making parents reach out to me for that, this is a way that they can earn it if need be, and they don't have to reach out. They can just participate in something we're already doing. So thank you. I'm pretty excited about it. Now, some of you have been waiting since last Sunday for this because I made you wait all week. And we have the winners of our chili cook-off. Now, we had students were supposed to make the chili or at least help their parents. I don't know how much of that went on. But we also had a couple extras thrown in there to help us in our endeavor to make sure we had enough chili for everybody. And so we have first, second, and third place. And if you got first, second, or third, you are going to receive one of these cool engraved wooden spoons to commemorate the moment. That has a chili cook-off on there. That's right. You can give it. These are pretty cool. I found these on Etsy. Yeah, I know about Etsy. Yeah. So, but third place. And this one was a favorite and was on most of the ballots, even if it wasn't first. But this was pretty impressive. Third place went to the Charlies and Zarates. So where's Jose and Marshall at? Is Jose here? Is Marshall here at least? Come here, Marshall. Come get your spoon. Third place went to Marshall and Jose and Nicolette and their family for their delicious chili. I'm going to make you stand up here until the rest get there. Is that okay? No. So they can see that you're real. All right, second place, moving on. This one was thrown in there and I thank her for this, and she is going to be maybe the most excited because she was asking me like the whole time, like, when do I know if I win or not? But second place goes to Rita Marshall. Rita. And I would give Abe credit, but I know Rita made it. Here, you give this to Abe. He's doing his slow. He's savoring the moment here. But first place that also is going to get the chili chain. Oh, you guys left me. I was going to let you stay up here. It's okay. But this goes to the other Marshalls, Zane and Micah. And really, I should say Molly. Zane is the one that's going into the youth group next in about a month. Oh, Zane's not coming up here. But Molly, I heard, helped a lot more than Zane. In fact, I believe Molly deserves the credit for the corn. So if you had chili number 9, that had the corn in there, Molly gets the credit. Good job, Micah. This is good parenting, by the way, making them all come up here. I'm gonna give this to Zane because I think he'll rock it the best. And so we got chili cook-off champ here, and then you can have the spoon. Here, hold on. I gotta get a selfie. I gotta get a selfie here, and then we'll get to the lesson. How do I take a selfie? All right. Give it up for your chili champions. Yes. Okay. Thank you for giving me that time. I love things that are fun like this, and I hope you guys had a good time at the event. And there was a lot of good chili there, by the way. So I'm thankful for everybody that participated. One more announcement. Next Sunday is Senior Sunday. And some of you are like, what? I put it on Facebook. I did not send out an email, and that's on me, so I apologize. But we have 4 seniors this year. We have Kirian Anderson, Jacob Duhan, Reed Faust, and Jesse Cruz. And so we will be honoring those 4 students next Sunday, so be here for that. And we'll have a special Senior Sunday service, and they'll participate in that worship. Aaron will have a short lesson, and as always, I'll have the senior video where there won't be a dry eye in the house. Okay, so I've heard these stories. They're fantastic. So that's just a couple of announcements. Now let's move on into what we're talking about today. So Aaron is gone. I can report. What? Oh, now kids, you can go to kids' church. If you are a 2-year-old through 4th grade, you are welcome to head downstairs. Thank you, sir. Love you, Asher. Have fun. Kids, and my kids did this to me last night, but kids can really brighten your day. But if you are 2 through 4th grade, I don't know if I finished that, you can head downstairs out the back here and go to kids' church. As Brent alluded to, and as Cassandra, I think, has announced via Facebook, it's been a long week. Starting on Monday, and really Tuesday, when I knew I had to preach this Sunday, I didn't really feel like it. Just being honest and real with you. And Wednesday came around, and I didn't feel like teaching Bible class on Wednesday, but I pick myself up, I teach a lesson, I get to be around the teens. And we were missing a bunch for Shrek the Musical and some other things. We still had 22 teenagers there, and they lifted my spirits. Brent talked about how we have a lot more young ladies coming. We have had anywhere from 7 to 10 7th grade girls alone on Wednesday nights over the last 6 months. That is incredible. That is not a testament to me. That is a testament to our students. It is a testament to the church and all of the prayers. But most importantly, that is a testament to Jesus Christ. We are having people come and experience the love of Jesus, and they enjoy it, and they come back, and they come back. And I'm telling you, God knows how to stretch us. Because if there's one thing in youth ministry after almost 5 years that I do not feel equipped to handle, and that is middle school girls. So elders, thank you for allowing me the opportunity to hire someone to bless the lives of our young ladies and our young men, but she will be predominantly working with our young ladies. So getting into the lesson this week, I'll tell you, by the time the end of the week rolled around, as hard as it is, this is the only place that I want to be right now. And that's because of God's goodness, and that's because of His love, and that's because of all of the prayers of my in-laws, of ladies' prayer group, of this church as a whole, of Facebook, of friends, etc. And ironically, or maybe just coincidentally, we're talking about the Son this week. Aaron talked about the Son of Man and how Jesus used that term as his term of choice when speaking about himself. When people asked him who he was, he would talk about, I am the Son of Man. He broke out everything last week to make us feel comfortable with Jesus, or to feel one as human Jesus. You know, when he was walking on this earth, I was just waiting on him to break out the Jesus is my homeboy quote, right? That's the last thing that I was waiting on Aaron to bust out last week, because he was painting this awesome picture of how Jesus denied himself, came to earth as a lowly servant, experienced all of human emotion, and was fully the Son of Man. Now, there is a little bit, as I study into the Son of God, I could argue there's a little bit of divine context in the Son of Man, and when Aaron got to the end of the sermon last week, he drove that home. But this week, we're exploring a little bit different topic, and that topic is the Son of God. This is the phrase that the majority of you are probably the most comfortable with, the one that you've grew up knowing, understanding. This is how we see Jesus, as this figure of deity, and he is above us, and he was perfect, and he was sinless, and he was blameless, and he was our intercessor, and he rose on the 3rd day, and he ascended into heaven, and he sat at the right hand of God. We see this exalted picture of Jesus, and he is everything that I just said. And so sometimes, though, we ignore his humanness, his human nature that he lowered himself to become. But this week we get to talk about his divine nature. And as I studied this, it became more and more interesting to me, but it also became more and more scattered about how I wanted to hone in and talk about this. Like I said, it's been a long week. But the more I looked at Jesus being the Son of God, the more thankful I was that we have a Savior that is both human and divine. And we know that the Son of God, that term, that phrase, means that Jesus is divine. And so, as we look back into the Old Testament and into the New Testament, we're going to look today about the appearances of Son of God or some form of that phrase. It could be child of God. It could be God's only begotten Son. There's all different ways to say Son of God, but not all of them. In fact, there's only one specific phrase and who it's about that means divine. And so the best way I can kind of explain what I'm going to do next, if this is going to work, well, I think I went too far. There it is. Some of you are laughing because you know what this means. This is Dwight Schrute. This is a picture of him, and this is a joke, because if you watched The Office, I'm telling on myself a little bit here, but if you watched The Office, Dwight K. Schrute was the assistant to the regional manager. And he was given that title just kind of placate him. He is the overzealous salesman that leads in sales almost every year, but he wants nothing more than to have power. And so what Dwight Schrute does is he goes to his business cards and he writes out the to the. He wants to be assistant regional manager to Michael Scott. But words matter, don't they? And the way that you word things matter. And so Dwight didn't have that power. Dwight was assistant to the regional manager. And so as I start talking about this phrase of Son of God, I have to start by talking about the phrase sons of God. Now, sons of God is a plural form of Son of God that is mentioned 5 times in the Old and 5 times in the New. Now, if you look at different translations, that may change by a little bit, but essentially 5 times in the Old Testament and 5 times in the New, and they generally mean something a little bit different. And so if you're reading in the Old Testament and you hear the sons of God references back in Job, back in Genesis, and so all of these things are even where it's talking about the Nephilim. No, I am not going to try to preach on the Nephilim today. You're welcome. Because we would all just be more confused when we left. But the sons of God in the Old Testament oftentimes, in fact, almost exclusively refers to some type of heavenly being. Not God, not equal with God, but some type of heavenly being, whether that's an angel or whether that's a fallen angel, if you will. Someone always asks me, and sometimes my kids even ask me, like, what does fallen angel mean? So the best way I can describe fallen angel, and this is only important because when we talk, you see the sons of God, sometimes it does mean some heavenly beings, but sometimes you want to be able to differentiate between fallen angels. They're not the divine beings that God created that obeyed God, right? And so I taught middle school for 4 years before I became a youth minister. It fully prepared me for what I was to expect, except for the middle school girls part. It's just, I don't know, I can't figure it out. But in middle school, I had a class in 6th grade. I loved the class. They love me. I get along great with my students, believe it or not. And I taught them 6th grade math. Yeah, they liked a math teacher. And I can promise you they will claim that. They are seniors this year, by the way, and I am old. But how do I describe a fallen angel? Well, I had a student in my class, and she was like straight A student. She always asked the right questions. She studied for her test. She never talked when she wasn't supposed to. She was the easiest student I could ever teach. And then the last day of school happened. And she was part of 3 girls. The other 2, I'm like, yeah, they're kind of obnoxious. I mean, good kids, got good grades. They're kind of obnoxious. I'm like, yeah, you guys are, I'm not surprised. But this 3rd girl was part of this group. And I walk into school on the last day, and they thought it'd be funny. I don't know why. People like to make fun of me because I'm bald. I'm telling you, you make fun of bald people enough, you're going to become bald. But I walk in, and from behind, I just feel this wet sensation and this hit on my head like, probably sounded a little bit different, but all of a sudden stuff's just like running down my shoulders. And I like bend over because I'm like, I don't want it on my clothes. I got to be in these clothes all day. And I go to the bathroom. I don't even get mad. I don't yell. I don't do anything. I go to the bathroom and I clean up. And then I hear, of course, the principal yelling, which he never yelled. And so it was kind of awesome. But I figured out these 3 girls had broken eggs on my head and thought it was a hilarious prank to end school. I guess they were too comfortable with me, which can be a bad thing, but this girl that had made straight A's and never done anything wrong this entire year was one of the 3. That's how I describe a fallen angel. And so when you see sons of God in the Old Testament, it's oftentimes referring to heavenly beings. If you go into the New Testament and you see this plurality, it basically means, it's mentioned about 5 times, and to succinctly sum it up, it basically means Christians. It's a way to describe Christians. This plurality of these people that were following Jesus, sons of God, described Christians. And then if you go to the Old Testament, you'll see we're son of God, or even just this illusion of God's son or God's chosen people has similar meaning. Now, that is the plurality of the word, but that is not what we are covering. I wanted to make sure we looked at it because that's something that you guys are going to see, and I wanted to cover it just to make sure we understood what it was. Now, if we're going to, sorry, I should have went to that earlier. We're going to run through a few verses. And it starts in Mark 1:1. Now, this is going to be starting in the singular nature of this term, Son of God. And so in Mark 1:1, it says, "This is the good news about Jesus, the Messiah, the Son of God. It began just as the prophet Isaiah had written. Look, I am sending my messenger ahead of you, and he will prepare your way." Obviously talking about John the Baptist. But we have Son of God talking about Jesus. If we move on to John 1:34, that is, I'll tell you the page number as I turn there. John 1:34 is actually on page 852 if you have these Bibles. In John 1:34, it says, "I saw this happen to Jesus, so I testify that he is the chosen one of God." If you go to Matthew 16:16, I know we're turning a lot. We're going to these verses. It's important as I move forward. In Matthew 16:16 on page 786, it says, "Simon Peter answered, 'You are the Messiah, the Son of the living God.'" And that's just a short response from a larger story. In John 11:27, I'm not going to read all of these so I can save some time, but in John 11:27, Mary is confessing that Jesus is the Christ, the Son of God. In John 20:31, John's gospel was actually written so that we may believe that Jesus was the Son of God. And then in Acts 8:37, and we'll talk more about this later, but the Ethiopian eunuch confessed Jesus as Christ, the Son of God, before he was baptized. The New Testament is very clear. The New Testament writers, especially the gospel writers, make it a point. And it happens over 40 plus times in the New Testament, whether it says Son of God or a variation of that phrase that implies Jesus' deity as God's chosen Son, both man and God. It says it so often in the New Testament, and it's very clear as to the implications. This is one of those things as I studied, I thought maybe I would read something that would muddy the waters, that would be interesting, that I could share with you guys, and then we could reason it out together. But it's not there. When the New Testament is talking about Son of God, it is referencing Jesus and his deity. Now we established that. That's not the whole sermon. Sorry, you can't go to Bible class early and or talk to more people. But I want us to understand the concept and the broader history of it. And so it's not surprising that in the Second Temple Jewish literature or in the gospel writers or the writers of the New Testament who were also originally Jews, that you would see this language. I mean, Simon bar Jonah, Simon, son of Jonah. You look at the genealogies, you see son of language all throughout the genealogies. You even see in the Old Testament Jesus referred to as the son of David. And we look at this genealogy and we see how all of these sons of this patronymic, I think I said that right, patronymic language of every father naming their son, and the son is known by their name, son of blank. is a common way of using this phrase, so we're not surprised when Jesus uses Son of God. Now, some of the occasions when we see Son of God in the Old Testament aren't necessarily Son of God as a exact phrase. It's actually really hard to find Son of God next to each other in the Old Testament when you search just for that exact phrase. And Daniel, if you guys remember Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, and they're in the fiery furnace, this is the one time where you see that phrase, and even in some translations, it's Son of God's. But Son of God, there's a fourth person or a fourth being in this fire protecting them like a Son of God. Not the, but a, right? Potentially meaning some type of heavenly being that is protecting Shadrach, Meshach, and Abednego, because we know the story. As they go into the fiery furnace, they're not consumed by the fire, but everything that gets close to it is completely consumed. And so we get these glimpses in the Old Testament where we see it, but the phrase is not existent in the same amount as the New Testament. So when you go into the Old Testament, we look at things like Adam, who was created by God in the story of creation. God breathed life into Adam, and then out of Adam, out of man, came woman. You look at God's chosen people who are referred to as his sons, also the sons of Israel, who was Jacob and wrestled with God, hence Israel. And you also see when this language of people being God's son in David. And so this non-divine phrase, when speaking about some of these beings in the Old Testament, it's very important that we understand that Jesus was the fulfillment of all of those things that Adam and David and the Israelites couldn't fulfill. He perfected what God wanted in his chosen people. He perfected what God wanted in David as a king and his lineage. He perfected what God wanted in the garden where Adam and Eve were residing. And all they had to do is not eat from the tree of the knowledge of good and evil. And so we see these entities or these people, and sometimes multiple people or singular people that are referred to in the context of God's sons, but not in the divine way, because they were not able to fulfill the divine nature that Jesus Christ could. And so before I get into the application, I want us to turn to 2 Samuel chapter 7. 2 Samuel chapter 7, it's on page 256. See if I can get it up here. So if we go to 2 Samuel chapter 7, verses 13 through 16, it says, "He is the one who will build a house, a temple for my name, and I will secure his royal throne forever. I will be his father, and he will be my son. If he sins, I will correct and discipline him with the rod, like any father would do, but my favor will not be taken from him, as I took it from Saul, whom I removed from your sight. Your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever." As God speaks these words to David, it has more of an implication than David and the throne that he sat on among the Israelites. And as he had, yes, it goes from David and then Solomon, kingdom split, then you have the lineage of David, and you have the lineage of the Israelites, the northern kingdom. And so as this kingdom splits, there's not very many good kings, but it's still the lineage of David, right? But what God is saying here in 2 Samuel chapter 7 is that your house and your kingdom will continue before me for all time, and your throne will be secure forever. He didn't mean the throne of the king of the Israelites, right? Because we know what happens after a few hundred years. We know that both kingdoms, northern and southern kingdoms, were taken over. We know that the kings that sat on those thrones were toppled. They did not keep their power. And so when he promises this line of David, the Jews also realized that this was referencing someone to come, God's son, this divine being. The problem is they didn't see him for who he really was. They wanted an earthly king to restore the throne of David in an earthly way. But instead we get Jesus, who did so much more than that. Turn to Psalm 2:7. Here's another implication in the Old Testament. So in Psalm 2:7, it's on page 442. It says, "The king proclaims the Lord's decree. The Lord said to me, 'You are my son. Today I have become your father. Only ask, and I will give you the nations as your inheritance, the whole earth as your possession. You will break them with an iron rod and smash them like clay pots.'" You are my son. We know in Isaiah that Jesus is foretold about. This divine being, the Son of God, the one who will sit at the top of a holy throne. But as we think of this divine nature of Jesus, I want to hearken back to last week a little bit. As Jesus was tested in the wilderness for 40 days, so we get 40 days of testing, you get 40 years in the wilderness. One of the coolest things, well, coolest is probably the wrong term, but I'm a numbers person, and so when I read about numbers, I'm like, these numbers, I know God can make the numbers perfect, but when I read and find out that more than likely these numbers are just like periods of time, and they mean something because the writers never do anything in the Bible without meaning something or having implications. But 40 days, 40 years, it could be an amount of time that wasn't necessarily exact. But what I do know is that 40 days was used for a reason. Because 40 days represented the time Jesus was being tempted in the wilderness, and it gives us imagery of the 40 years that the Israelites wandered in the desert. When Jesus was being tempted in the wilderness, Satan uses some very specific language. And he tells him, says, "If you are the Son of God, throw yourself off this cliff. You can save yourself. If you are the Son of God." He taunted him with this divine title. And so as he does that, Jesus fulfills what the Israelites couldn't. The Israelites could have entered the promised land right away. But they disobeyed God. They didn't trust in God. They didn't believe that he had the power to do what he said he would do. And so they had to wander for 40 years until the next generation would go and do what they were told to do. But Jesus is the fulfillment. These sons of God, these sons of Israel that are wandering, God's chosen people wandering in the desert, they couldn't fulfill what God's purpose was for them, but Jesus could. And this is part of the reason why he ascends to this title of Son of God. It was planned from the beginning. So he is this blameless, sinless Son of God. He succeeded where Adam and David and the Israelites all failed. But he was also human, experienced human emotion, was the Son of Man, and he had this duality to make him both feel like we can relate to him, but also that he is our intercessor that can do what we can't do. And he is this divine nature that can save us as our intercessor. And so this duality is something that's very important as we understand God. Okay, I've given you a lot of information. But this would just be Bible class if we didn't have some sort of application. And I wish I had some type of cool example up front. My brain power didn't have that this week. However, I do want to pose two things. And so I don't think any of us really believe, I don't think we have issues understanding that Son of God also meant that Jesus was divine, right? I know that you guys know that. If that's all I talked about, it would be a disservice for the sermon. We know those things. But there's implications to those things that we don't always think about. And so when we consider these implications, they could potentially move us to act or move us to a deeper level of thought or love or devotion to the Son of God. And so both the New Testament and Second Temple Jewish writers use all this wording to express the divinity of the one to come and the divinity of the one who was walking among them in the New Testament. So we've established all of that, but what does it all matter if his divine nature as the Son of God doesn't shape our faith in some way? As we consider and we wrestle with, if some of us are, that this Son of God, this divinity is true, then we have to determine what does it call us to do. And so if you look at John 3:16, this is one of the most popular verses. You see it everywhere. Most people have it memorized. And if you don't, that's okay. But this is the one that you see Tim Tebow wearing on his eye black. Okay, I'm old. That's from 2008, if you guys don't get that reference. But a football player wearing it on his eye black. It got really big. Everybody was searching John 3:16. They wanted to know it. It was this common verse, and it says, "For God loved the world so much that he gave his one and only Son, so that everyone who believes in him will not perish but have eternal life." God sent his Son into the world not to judge the world, but to save the world through him. In some translations, you see the word begotten, his one begotten Son. It's this differentiation between us being children of God and God, or Jesus, being the Son of God, the one and only, the one begotten Son. And as we consider that, what is our natural instinct when it comes to our kids? If you have kids, your one job, well, you have a lot of jobs, but the main job that we tell our kids, especially when they're trying to do something they shouldn't, is we say, our job is to protect you. Jesus was the only begotten Son of God. And so when I think of God making the sacrifice of giving his Son, Jesus Christ, for all of us, I think of my first instinct. My first instinct would be to protect my son. Now, I'm not saying God wanted, or maybe that's the wrong word to say. I'm not saying that God didn't want to protect Jesus. But as it says in John 3:16, he loved us so much that instead of protecting Jesus, he allowed him to die so that we could all have eternal life. And the first thought of my mind, it came to a story that's happened recently. If you guys have been following the story about Cleveland, Texas, you guys know there were 5 people that were shot and killed, basically because one neighbor told another neighbor, "Hey, our baby's trying to sleep. Can you stop shooting your AR-15 next to our house?" Seems reasonable. Evidently, this guy was either mentally unstable or was having a bad day or just got overly angry, and he goes next door and he kills 5 of the 10 people in that house. One of them was a little boy, 8 years old. But one of the things, and the reason why I tell this story that stuck out to me, is when I continue to read, they say there were 2 women draped over some other kids that survived. Because their one instinct, their natural instinct as a parent, was to go and protect their kid. And so it's a super awful tragedy. I teared up when I was reading the story. Like I said, it's been a long week, a lot of heavy stuff. But those 2 women did what I hope that I would do, what I think all of you would do that are parents, is they protected their kid. But God, the implication of God not only having a son, the only begotten son, but allowing him to die is huge. Because what that does show to us is that he also loves us quite a bit. And so when we look at the next set of verses, turn to Romans 8 as I tell this story. I know I didn't get to 1 John 4:9. It talks about how Jesus was God's begotten son as well, another way to talk about it. But as I wrap up, I got to tell this story. In John chapter 8, it talks about adoption. So Cassandra and I, to keep it short, I'm not going to get into what we're going through this week because I will tear up, but we've been trying to have a biological child for 12 years. 11 years ago, we had a similar situation, and Cassandra miscarried. And after the miscarriage, obviously we were broken, we were devastated. But one thing we had always talked about doing is we wanted to adopt. And so what we did is we prayed to God, and as we tried to heal, is we decided that we were going to foster. We had a lot of people at church that did this. They fostered kids. And even one family they're my superheroes, they have fostered, last I checked, almost 50 different children that have gone back to their families. They've adopted one. And it was a young lady that was hearing impaired, and that family could all sign. It was like God's hand on that situation. And so we decided to foster. We go through the process. They fast track us in the summer because they know we're teachers. And then all of a sudden, right before school starts, we get a phone call. We didn't even know our house was open yet. And we get a phone call on Friday, and we thought we were going to get Thea that day. Well, she wasn't Thea at the time, sorry. Thelma Lee Jackson. And Thelma Lee Jackson, we at least had a weekend to get prepared. We found a crib, we found stuff we needed. Our church was amazing. We found these little resources in town, and we got it done. And by Monday, we at least had a weekend, and Monday they bring Thea to me. I was nervous because I didn't know how I was going to feel. I love kids in general. This is our mission in life. Because Sarah and I will both tell you we became teachers not because we couldn't do anything else, but because we love kids. We love to mentor. We love to make an impact on young people. Like, that's what we've always wanted to do. It just took us a few years of changing our majors to figure that out. But Thelma, comes to us on a Monday. And I remember the first time she was in my arms and then on my lap. And I looked at her, and I didn't know what to feel. I didn't. To be honest with you, it wasn't like this feeling of, oh my goodness, we have a child. Because in the back of my head, too, we may be giving Thea back to her parents. I mean, reunification is the goal in a foster home, and that's okay. We want that because that means that the family is doing well, and they've gone through the things they need to do to get better to get their kid back. But Thea was with us for a long time. And we changed her name to Thea pretty quickly, but it took about 2 days. And I know I'm ashamed to say it took that long, but it took 2 days for me to become so attached that if Thea Rosalie Stauder would have never been adopted by us, I would have been devastated. Because you see, whether you have a biological child or you adopt two, like we have, and we fostered 2 kids and we've adopted them both, and I know in my heart that I could not love them any more than I possibly do. And I could not love a child that Cassandra bore that was biological any more than I love Thea and Talon. And I don't say that to tear you up. I say that to make this point. The implications of Jesus being the Son of God and God allowing him to die for you means that he has adopted you. And so in Romans 8, verses 14 through 17, I'm going to read this and then we'll be done. Took too long announcing my chili winners, I'm sorry. In Romans 8, verse 14, it says, "For all who are led by the Spirit of God are children of God. So you have not received a spirit that makes you fearful slaves. Instead, you received God's Spirit when he adopted you as his own children. Now we call him Abba, Father, for his Spirit joins with our spirit to affirm that we are God's children. And since we are his children, we are his heirs. In fact, together with Christ, we are heirs of God's glory. But if we are to share his glory, we must also share his suffering." I don't want to focus on that last part. We are adopted by God. We are children of God. As we go over here, how important is it that we profess that Jesus is the Son of God before we commit our lives to Christ through baptism? There's a reason why we do that. It's our confession. Because understanding and admitting that Jesus is the Son of God is an essential part of our Christianity. But the best news is when we commit ourselves to Christ and we receive that Holy Spirit and we are led by that Holy Spirit, we are now called children of God. And we may not be divine in nature, but we are heirs to the kingdom that God has in store for us. And that is awesome. And so as we end this morning, the importance of understanding and realizing that Jesus is the Son of God, that there is this deity, he is divine and human. It is essential for us as Christians to come to that conclusion, because that's how we are led to commit ourselves to following Jesus Christ and ultimately being baptized and confessing that he is Lord. This morning, no better time than now. I don't always offer an invitation, but when I'm talking about the Son of God and I'm talking about the importance of confessing his name, his deity, I feel like I have to say, if you're being led this morning, if you feel like you need to confess that Jesus is the Son of God, that you want to do that in front of everybody and be baptized, I would love for you to do that. If there's any other needs, if you need prayers, if you need anything else that the elders or myself can help you with as we end this lesson and we stand and sing, then come forward as Craig leads us in our song.
Jesus, you're my firm foundation.